Hello everyone and welcome to an exciting matchup from yesterday's Clutch Chess. It is day 2, so that means every victory is worth not 1 but 2 points, and as you know, today on day 3 every victory will be worth 3 points. And I went through all of the games and I thought you guys might enjoy this match the most. It is Fabiano Caruana versus Magnus Carlsen. As in the previous 2 showings, we are going to show both the games they played because both of them are incredible. One from a positional / tactical point of view, and the other one from a tactical / positional point of view, if that makes sense. But before we check out the game, I would just like to blow my own horn a little bit, if that is the expression. Today, before making this video, actually, I hit 2,500 on Chess for the first time. It's a bullet rating, and as you can see, I've played quite a lot of bullet games. I played even more, but a couple of years ago, my account got hacked, so everything was reset to 0. But yeah, I managed to get 2,500 for the first time, and I am happy to say that I have Lotus Chess to thank for that, because I've been using it consistently over the past 2 months, maybe even more. Not every day, because I have lost my streak a couple of times, but still, I've improved immensely, especially in openings like against the Carlsen or against the French. I've honed my Scandinavian a little bit, and it really does sell, because I think in bullet you can really, it does require a certain other set of skills than classical chess and rapid, but it's a fairly good way to test openings. And yeah, if you still haven't tried it, first link in the description below. Download Lotus Chess, and I have 2 kids. I have very little time. I play a little bit in the evening to improve my chess. But if you have a couple of hours to spend, then you can invest time. Sky's the limit. You can beat this and get 3,000 bullet easily. But yeah, that being said, let's check out the game. It is Fabiano Caruana versus Magnus Carlsen, and Fabi opens with pawn to e4. And this game reminded me of the old... not the first version of Chaturanga, but of Shatranj, the sort of second version of chess that was modified when Persia took it over from India, and then they improved it a little bit, so to say, changed the rules. And I remember reading a book a couple of years ago, and you had masters of Shatranj, and if you wanted to be even considered a master of Shatranj, you would have to know. They didn't have like openings that you had to study moves, but they had, I think they were called mansubas or something like that, where you would have to know the first 50 starting positions. And then if you were a master, it was considered that, of course, all the ins and outs. We're not just going to play out moves. We can start from a certain position, 20 moves on, 15 moves on, maybe even more. Yeah, this game definitely reminds me of that, because look at this. Pawn to e5, knight f3, knight to c6, and bishop to b5. Fabio opts for the Ruy Lopez, and Magnus goes for knight to f6, the Berlin defense. And in good hands, it's probably a safe bet that you're not going to lose the game playing the Berlin defense. Even the great Garry Kasparov could not overcome the Berlin defense in his famous World Chess Championship match. Here we have castles, knight captures on e4, and pawn to d4. The Rio Gambit accepted, thousands and thousands of games in the database. Knight d6, bishop captures, d captures on e5, knight to f5, and queen captures on d8. King captures, and even this is too early to start analyzing, because there are too many games in the database. Knight to c3 is the most played move. Here we have pawn to h3, king e8, again most played move in this position. Knight c3, pawn to h5, bishop to f4, and bishop to e7. Rook a to d1, all known. Bishop to e6 by Magnus. We have knight to g5, putting pressure on the bishop, and rook to h6, so you don't have to capture with the pawn. We have rook f to e1 and pawn to h4. And again, all of this has been reached before. Some people played the rook e4 here, some knight c to e4, king to h2, also known. We have knight captures on e6, and Magnus plays rook captures on e6. Again, still known, knight to e4, and here we deviate from any known position. There is a game where pawn to b6 was played, which is not the best move. Magnus plays pawn to c5, which is the top move recommended by the engine. So it is now, as of move 16, that we have a completely new game. And from this point on, the gameplay will simply send you into a sort of a state of amazement. Look at this. Pawn to c3. Okay, pawn to c4. We have pawn to g4, inviting a trade en passant on g3. H captures, F captures, and pawn to b5. Okay, seems like everything is perfectly fine, but believe it or not, white is very, very close to obtaining a winning advantage here. Fabi plays king f2, pawn to b4. You're probably wondering, how is this possible? Where is this advantage? Rook to e2, and now rook to b8. You can see that both of them are playing fairly quickly, but Fabi has almost twice the time on the clock. And here it comes, pawn to h4. And this is the problem. It is very, very easy to create a pass pawn here because everything is just in the right place. Magnus goes rook to e6, goes after the a2 pawn, and Fabi just plays pawn to h5. And now the question is, can you capture on a2? Well, no. If you capture on a2, then look at this. Pawn to g4, knight h6, pawn to g5, knight to f5, pawn to h6, and after captures and captures, king f8, you just play rook g1. You cut off the black king, and the pawn is now promoting to a queen. Simple as that. So after h5, king to f8, Magnus realizes this and says, all right, I need an extra tempo with my king, and Fabi goes pawn to g4. We have knight h6, and now even king to f3. You can go with g5 right away. King f3 also has a very, very important purpose. We have rook captures on a2 by Magnus, g5, knight to f5, and now king to g4. That's what the tempo was all about. And now Magnus has to play pawn to g6. And I think everyone, including your uncle, plays pawn to h6 here because why wouldn't you? But no, Fabi plays h captures on g6 because Fabi no longer is interested in promoting his pawn. He now wants to checkmate Magnus. And yes, you've heard me correctly. He will use his knight, bishop, and rook to checkmate Magnus. We have f captures on g6, and now pawn to e6, freeing up the e5 square for the bishop. The pawn is covering f7, and then rook h2, rook to h1, going all the way to h8. So can Magnus stop this? Objectively, no, but chess is rarely an objective game. Bishop to d6, we have knight f6 now. And b captures on c3, and you could play bishop captures on d6, and no one would blame you. It is, it makes sense to play this move because why wouldn't you? Fabi even shows off a little bit and plays rook to h1. And there's only one good way for Magnus to try and hold this, and that is to play bishop captures on f4, the move that could have been avoided altogether had Fabi captured on d6. But now Fabi has to be engine precise in order to win this game, and it's not easy. How do you win this? Feel free to pause the video and win the game while I give you a couple of seconds. Yes, king captures on f4 is a butcher's move, but you guys are not butchers, you guys are artists, so the artist's move is rook to h7, believe it or not to h8, and I will show you why. If you go rook to h8 right away, and the rook to h7 is preparation for rook to h8. If you play rook to h8, then king e7, okay, you capture on b8, now c captures on b2. The problem is now knight to d5 check, forks the king and the bishop, but after king d6 and knight captures on f4, the problem is after pawn to c3, you don't have e7. That is the problem. And that is a big problem. If you could play pawn to e7, it'd be great, but you can't, as the knight also covers that. So you have no good way of continuing this game with any sort of advantage. And that is why after bishop captures on f4, rook to h7 is the move, because now you're threatening mate in one. Rook to f7 will be checkmate as e8, and g8 is covered by the knight. So only one move for Magnus, and that is knight to g7. That avoids checkmate. And what has Fabi accomplished by playing this Zwischenzug? Well, the knight is no longer covering e7. That's the whole point. And now he goes rook to h8, and now he's winning. King to e7, rook captures on b8, and now the same line that we've tried no longer works, because captures knight to d5, king to d6, knight captures on f4, pawn to c3. Here comes e7, and that's it. Yes, you are covering e8, but doesn't really do anything. For example, you can go rook to a1, threaten to promote, but now look at this. Rook to e6 check, king d7, and rook to d8 will be checkmate. Amongst other things, there are many other lines that win. I just thought this was the nicest one. So instead, after rook captures on b8, we have rook captures on b2 by Magnus. We have rook e captures on b2, c captures on b2, and now just knight to d5 check. King to d6, and knight captures on f4. And now, while the e7 cannot be played as the king is now covering e7, you don't need it. b2 is hanging, and Magnus has to defend it, plays pawn to c3, and now there's only one move that wins the game, but I'm pretty sure you guys see it because it's the one that we, if it has nothing to do with the b4 square, it's usually a move with the knight back, and that is exactly what Fabi does. Knight to e2, and he was in this position on move 38 that Magnus Carlsen resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. whatever you play, knight captures on e6, just knight captures on c3, and that's it. The pawn can no longer do anything. You're up a full rook, completely winning. Which brings us to game number 2. And now Magnus, having lost game 1, obviously he has to show something in game 2. So let's see what this something is. Now Magnus goes for pawn to d4. We have pawn to d5 from Fabi, knight f3, knight to f6, and pawn to c4. D captures on c4. Fabi accepts the queen's gambit. We have queen to a4 with check, knight b to d7. Much more rare than, for example, pawn to c6 or bishop to d7. But now Magnus doesn't recapture right away. He goes knight to c3, pawn to a6, and bishop to f4. We have pawn to e6, and now there are a couple of games where queen captures on c4 was played. Magnus goes pawn to e4, and it is now already, as of move 7, that we have a completely new game. Probably thinking that Fabi will, play some docile move like pawn to b6, then you capture on c4, and the game continues. But no, Fabi invests over 4 minutes in this position and plays pawn to b5, which shouldn't be possible. I mean, look at this. That rook on a8 is undefended. But that's the kind of guy that Fabi is. He beat Magnus with white, and now he wants to fight with black. Absolutely beautiful. And also the idea that, if you want to avoid any difficult variations, because Fabi already invested over 4 minutes, and 4 minutes for Fabi, he probably calculated all the way to the bare naked kings. If you move the queen, then just bishop b4, and you're already much worse. This is just a bad position. Bishop coming to b7. This is a dream position for black. So after e4 and the b5, Magnus accepts the challenge. Knight captures on b5. We have a captures on b5. Queen captures on a8, and now bishop to b4 with check. And what did Fabi calculate? I mean, it's I was so happy when I saw this, because Fabi won the first game. And, a victory and a draw against Magnus is not a terrible result, and especially now with black against Magnus. But the point is that if Magnus goes bishop to d2, now Fabi's idea was knight b6, and after queen to c6 check, bishop to d7. And after queen to b7, bishop to c8, and after queen to c6 check, bishop to d7. And we would have some sort of a draw by threefold repetition, because anything else that Magnus does would cost him the game. So that's what kind of a tricky guy Fabi is. But Magnus says, "Oh no, you don't." King to e2. He says, "No, we're fighting. I don't care. If my king is on e2 blocking my bishop, I'm not giving you an easy way out." And he wants to play. And it's still very much possible to play this, but Fabi finds the absolute best resources. Plays pawn to e5. And now look at this. D captures on e5. You might be thinking, what is Fabi doing? That pawn is very nicely defended. But no, it's not. Knight captures on e5. And what is this? Well, the idea is pretty straightforward. If you capture with the bishop, you go bishop captures on e5. Then the idea is queen d3 checkmate. So that's pretty straightforward. There's also the possibility of knight captures on e5. Now the d3 square is covered. But then Fabi had in mind bishop g4 check, and he picks up Magnus's queen on a8. And then after knight captures, let's say queen captures on a8. Okay, you can capture on f6, but you have more, than enough to win the game easily, especially with that white king on e2. So Magnus probably applauded Fabi silently in his own mind, played rook to d1, and now Fabi plays knight to d3. And Magnus's position is just horrendous. We have queen to c6 check, bishop to d7, queen captures on c7, and now even queen to a8. Of course, avoiding the queen trade, no reason to do that. We have queen to b8 check, now forcing a queen trade. King to e7, so the rook can also come into the game. Queen captures, and now a nice decision too. Knight captures on f4. Force Magnus's king all the way to f4. King e3, rook captures on a8, king captures on f4, and now rook captures on a2. And believe it or not, after all of this, the material is even, but not even. It's 2 rooks, bishop and knight versus a rook, 2 bishops and a knight. So Magnus is up in exchange, but it doesn't matter. We have rook to b1. With pawn to e5, it's still very, very tricky. But after rook to b1, Fabi just goes pawn to g5. And look at this. Now, after knight captures, bishop d2 check picks up the knight, as the bishop and knight are doing a very good job covering the light squares. So king captures on g5, knight captures on e4 check, king f4, and knight captures on f2. Goes after Magnus's rook, rook g1, and now bishop to d6 check. And good luck surviving, in the middle of the bishop pair, the knight and the rook here. Plus, also, this pawn is very weak. Very soon, Fabi will have two connected pass pawns on the queen side. It's only a matter of preference how Fabi wishes to win this. We have king g5, knight to e4 check, king to h4, and the bishop to c5, forcing the rook back into the corner, rook to h1, and the bishop to f5. Now threatening some nasty discoveries. Pawn to g4, Magnus has to play active moves, bishop to e6, and bishop to h3, connecting the rooks and maybe hoping to trade off a pair of bishops. Pawn to b4. We have rook h to f1 and pawn to b3. Now you can even play something like maybe c3, create a pass pawn, but also if you just attack that b2 pawn and win it, the two connected pass pawns will be easily winning. So g5 offering a trade of light square bishops, bishop to f2 check. And now Magnus has to give back the exchange, otherwise if he moves, just bishop captures on h3. So okay, rook captures, we have knight captures on f2, and the bishop back to f1, somehow hoping to get rid of that c4 pawn. King to d6, we have king to g3, and now knight to e4 with check. King f4, and now f5 is the move you should play here. But Fabi plays knight to c5, and he sort of allows Magnus back in the game. But Magnus misses it, as both of them are very low on time. 20 seconds for Magnus, 11 seconds for Fabi. Knight to d4 would have been enough, because you would capture the bishop, and then you would capture the pawn on c4. Or, you go bishop to d5, but then knight to b5, would check, you put a knight on c3, and then everything is fine again. But after knight c5, Magnus went king to e3, and now knight to a4, the pawn is now lost. We have knight to d2, knight captures on b2, and now king to d4, king to e7, and pawn to h4. Pawn to f6 by Fabi, and knight to e4. And here we have f captures on g5, a mistake on Fabi's part, but, who would be able to take advantage of this? Magnus played something that we all do. He automatically recaptured, but the tricky move was knight c3. It's always a move with the knight back. Like I said, if it's not b4, it's a move with the knight back. And now, if you play g captures on h4, look at this. Of course, the rook couldn't move because the knight would hang, so he would capture on a2, and then after b captures, look at this, rook a1, still very tricky. Pawn to h3, rook captures on a2, pawn to h2, first force the bishop to move away, bishop to g2 guarding the queening square, and now c3, attacking the rook and defending the knight. And it seems like black is achieving something, but there's this simple thing called check in chess. And that's it. You move the king, king captures on c3, and it's still going to be a draw, but yeah, you're actually able to defend this. Magnus missed it, played h captures on g5, and now Fabi goes bishop to f5, and now he's once again winning. We have rook to e1, and bishop captures on e4. Again, a suboptimal move, just unpinning with king to f8 would be better, but, I think they were both super exhausted and couldn't calculate anymore, so they were just playing moves. Rook captures on e4, king f7, and now king to c3. Again, rook to e1 would have been much better. It's actually a draw, but king c3, now Fabi wins again. Knight to d1 check, king to b4, and now how do you win this? It's very tricky. You think b2, but no, if b2, then bishop captures on c4 with check, not just picks up the rook, but also guards the queening square. So that's a problem. So rook to c2, only move that wins. Rook to e1 by Magnus, and now knight to b2. We have bishop to h3, and Magnus decided to end the game by blundering a full rook. Knight to d3 check, and he was in this position on move 45 that Magnus Carlsen resigned in the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. Once you move the king, king a3, there's even rook to a2 checkmate. So, it's a disgustingly tactical game, which I, of course, enjoyed, and I hope you guys did as well. So yeah, really weird game one, where Magnus employed the Berlin, and then Fabi just said, I don't care, I'm just gonna crush you, and he did. And then in game two, I think this was definitely the highlight of the game, when Magnus when bishop to b4 check, and Magnus says, I'm not letting you off the hook, king e2. I mean, who plays that? who plays that against Fabiano Caruana? Magnus Carlsen, sometimes he loses the game because of it, but he's not just gonna move the bishop back to d2 and agree to a draw since he already lost game one. But yeah, that means Fabi wins both the game against Magnus, winning 4 points like Magnus did against Gukesh, and also in match 3, Magnus eliminated Hikaru in both games. I thought about showing that match, but I just didn't like the games. I mean, they were nice, Magnus versus Hikaru, but they were nowhere near as fun as these games against Fabi, so I decided to show these games. And these are the standings after game 2 of Clutch Chess 2025. Magnus Carlsen leading with 11.5. Fabiano Caruana 10.5, as he did beat Magnus Carlsen twice. Hikaru with 7 and Gukesh with 7. And it's all going to be about day 3, where you get 3 points for a win, which means that even Gukesh and Hikaru, who are now on 7 points, you beat Magnus 2 games, you get 6 points for that. You're already leading the tournament. So yeah, it's all about day 3. Day 1, I would say, pretty insignificant. Day 2, okay, but it's all about day 3. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you don't mind for me blowing my own horn a little bit at the beginning. But yeah, I hit 2,500 for the first time, and it's something that I never thought that would happen, but it did. And all it took was me stop doing all the same mistake that I did in every game over the past 50,000 games that I've played over the course of a couple of years. First link in the description below. Try it out. Download Lotus Chess. You guys will love it, guaranteed. So I hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank Gerard St. Pierre, Brazos Valley Chess Society, Francesco Corradi, Uzi Shalev, and Francisco Santana for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. So thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.